What happens when a prince who claims to champion mental health awareness completely loses his composure on live television? You're about to find out. Prince Harry just had the most spectacular meltdown in late-night television history, right here on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And folks, this wasn't just another celebrity having a bad day. This was a masterclass in how someone can completely self-destruct when faced with questions they've never been asked before. Before we dive into this absolute train wreck, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story is going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the Duke of Sussex. Now, let's set the scene. Prince Harry has been making the rounds on American television for years now. Book tours, documentary promotions, podcast appearances, you name it, he's done it. But here's the thing. American audiences are getting tired. The polite applause is getting quieter. The interest is waning, and people are starting to ask the obvious question. How many times can you tell the same story? Harry walked onto Stephen Colbert's set with his usual confident stride, that practiced smile we've all seen 100 times before. He waved to the studio audience, probably expecting the usual warm reception. But the applause was polite at best, lukewarm at worst. Even the studio audience seemed to be going through the motions. Colbert, being the seasoned professional he is, greeted his guest with his trademark wit and charm. "Welcome back to The Late Show, Your Royal Highness," he began, emphasizing the title with just a hint of playful sarcasm. "Or should I say, Your Royal Californianness?" The audience chuckled, but something interesting happened. Harry's smile faltered for just a moment. Just a split second, but it was there. "Just Harry is fine, Stephen," he said, his voice carrying a slight edge. "I've been trying to move away from all that royal protocol nonsense." Right there, in that moment, you could see the first crack in the armor. This wasn't going to be another softball interview where everyone nods along and asks about his favorite charity work. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a masterclass in how victimhood can become a prison, and how even princes aren't immune to the consequences of their choices. What happened next would expose years of carefully crafted public relations work and reveal the man behind the victim narrative. But before we dive into the complete breakdown, let's see how it all started. Colbert settled into his chair with that familiar smile, the one that says, "I'm about to ask you something you're not going to like." And boy, did he deliver. "So, Harry, you're here tonight to talk about your latest venture, another documentary about your struggles with royal life. I have to ask, and I mean this with all due respect, but how many times can you tell the same story?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. You could literally see Harry shift uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening just slightly. This was not the question he was expecting. This was not the script he'd rehearsed. "Well, Stephen," Harry began, his voice already carrying a defensive edge, "I think it's important to continue sharing my truth, especially when there are still so many misconceptions out there." And there it was. The phrase that would become the theme of this entire disaster, "my truth." Colbert leaned forward slightly, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Your truth," he repeated, emphasizing each word. "That's an interesting phrase. See, most people just call it the truth. But you've got your own special version." Harry's eyes narrowed. You could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out where this was going. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but everything I've shared has been honest and authentic." "Oh, I'm not implying anything," Colbert said with that disarming smile that makes him so dangerous. "I'm just curious about this concept of personal truth versus, actual truth. For instance, you've said in multiple interviews that you felt trapped in the royal family, that you had no choice but to leave. But didn't you actually have every choice in the world? I mean, you're a grown man from one of the wealthiest families on earth." The studio audience grew quiet. You could feel the shift in the room, that moment when everyone realizes they're not watching a typical celebrity interview anymore. They're watching something much more intense. Harry's practiced media persona began to crack. "Stephen, you clearly don't understand the pressures and constraints of royal life. The constant scrutiny, the lack of privacy, the inability to make your own decisions." But Colbert wasn't backing down. "But Harry," he pressed, "you're sitting here right now making the decision to do yet another interview. sharing more personal details about your family. Isn't that a choice? And isn't it a bit ironic that you're complaining about lack of privacy while simultaneously doing everything you can to stay in the public eye? Harry's face flushed red. This was not going according to plan. That's completely different. I'm trying to set the record straight, to share my side of the story. Your side? Colbert nodded thoughtfully. Right. But what about your family's side? What about your father's side? Or your brother's side? You've made some pretty serious accusations against them. Don't they deserve a chance to defend themselves without you constantly airing family business in public? And there it was, the first real crack in the facade. Harry's voice rose slightly as he snapped back. They've had plenty of chances. They chose to remain silent while I was being destroyed by the media. Destroyed? Colbert raised an eyebrow, and you could see where this was going. You signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. You've written best-selling books. You live in a mansion in California. If that's destruction, sign me up. The audience murmured, some actually chuckling at Colbert's observation. And that's when you could see it happening. Harry's composure was rapidly deteriorating. His hands were clenched, his breathing was getting faster, and that practiced smile was nowhere to be found. You don't know what you're talking about, Stephen, Harry said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The emotional toll, the psychological damage. But Colbert wasn't done. What came next would expose the fundamental contradiction in Harry's entire narrative. I'm sure it was difficult, Colbert said, his tone becoming more serious. But help me understand something. You've spoken extensively about mental health awareness, about the importance of therapy and healing. Yet here you are, years later, still publicly feuding with your family, still airing grievances on television. When does the healing actually begin? Harry's hands clenched into fists on his lap. This was not the conversation he'd prepared for. This was not the sympathetic interview he'd expected. Healing requires acknowledgement, Stephen. It requires accountability from those who caused the harm. So you're saying your family needs to publicly apologize to you before you can move on? I'm saying they need to take responsibility for their actions. Colbert leaned back in his chair, and you could see him switching into a different mode. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was intervention. You know, Harry, I've interviewed a lot of people who've overcome real trauma, real adversity. They don't usually spend years demanding apologies from their families on international television. They typically find ways to heal and move forward without destroying relationships. This is different, Harry insisted, his voice becoming more defensive with each word. You don't understand the unique circumstances. Help me understand then, Colbert said, his voice calm but relentless. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've chosen to monetize your family drama while positioning yourself as the victim. Is that fair? The question hit like a thunderbolt. Harry's face went white, then red again. How dare you suggest that I'm monetizing my trauma? Well, you did sign those lucrative media deals based largely on your willingness to share intimate family details, Colbert pointed out with devastating calm. That's pretty much the definition of monetizing. And that's when Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. This interview is over. We're just getting started, Colbert said, remaining seated with an almost therapeutic calm. Please sit down. Let's have an honest conversation. Honest? Harry laughed bitterly, and it was an ugly sound. You've been attacking me since the moment I sat down. I've been asking questions, Colbert corrected. That's what journalists do. Or did you expect another softball interview where everyone nods along to your narrative? The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators were zooming in on Harry's face, capturing every twitch of anger and frustration. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching a royal meltdown unfold in real time. You're just like all the rest of them, Harry spat, his voice dripping with venom. You pretend to be fair, but you're just another establishment mouthpiece trying to tear me down. Colbert's eyebrows shot up. Establishment mouthpiece? Harry, I'm a comedian who makes jokes about politicians for a living. If I'm part of the establishment, then the establishment has really lowered its standards. A few audience members couldn't help but chuckle, which only seemed to infuriate Harry more. His carefully crafted public image was crumbling before millions of viewers, and he knew it. "You think this is funny?" Harry turned toward the audience, his voice dripping with indignation. "You're laughing at someone who's been through hell." "Harry, please." Colbert held up a hand. "Don't blame the audience. They're just reacting to the situation. Why don't you sit back down and we can continue this conversation like adults?" "Like adults?" Harry whirled back to face the host. "You mean like how my family handled things like adults when they threw me under the bus?" "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about," Colbert said, his tone remaining surprisingly calm despite the chaos unfolding before him. "You keep saying your family wronged you, but you've never actually explained what they did that was so terrible. You speak in generalities, in vague accusations. What specifically did they do?" Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, just a moment, you could see the realization cross his face. He didn't have an answer. He'd been telling this story for so long, he'd forgotten that he'd never actually told the whole story. They refused to support me when I needed them most," he finally stammered. "How?" Colbert pressed. "Give me one concrete example." "They wouldn't defend me against the media attacks." "You mean they wouldn't issue public statements every time a newspaper wrote something you didn't like?" Colbert asked. "Harry, you're a grown man. Do you really expect your family to fight all your battles for you?" And then Harry did something that shocked everyone in the studio. "That's not what I meant," Harry screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. He was pacing now, like a caged animal, his hands trembling with rage. "You're twisting my words." "I'm using your words," Colbert said with devastating calm. "You're the one who said you felt trapped, that you had no choice. You're the one who spent years publicly criticizing your father and brother. I'm just asking you to explain the logic behind it." "The logic?" Harry laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. "The logic is that they made my life miserable and then expected me to smile and pretend everything was fine." "How did they make your life miserable?" Colbert pressed, relentless in his pursuit of actual facts. "Specifically, what did your father do? What did your brother do?" Harry opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around the studio as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. They didn't understand me. They didn't support my choices." "Which choices?" Colbert asked. "Your choice to serve in the military? They supported that. Your choice to get married? They supported that too. Your choice to have children? Also supported. Your choice to do charitable work? Definitely supported. So which choices exactly did they not support?" "My choice to leave," Harry said quietly, his voice barely audible. "Did they try to stop you from leaving?" "No, but they didn't make it easy." "Harry," Colbert said, and his voice took on an almost paternal tone. "Leaving the royal family is probably the most complicated logistical undertaking imaginable. There are constitutional issues, security concerns, financial arrangements. Did you expect them to just wave goodbye and wish you luck?" "I expected them to understand why I had to go." "But did you ever actually explain it to them?" Colbert asked. "Or did you just announce your decision and expect them to figure it out?" Harry's silence spoke volumes. The studio audience was completely quiet now, transfixed by the psychological unraveling happening before their eyes. "You know what I think?" Colbert continued, his voice taking on an almost therapeutic quality. "I think you made a difficult decision based on what you thought was best for your family, and that's admirable. But instead of owning that decision and moving forward, you've spent years trying to justify it by demonizing everyone you left behind. That's not healing, Harry. That's revenge." "You don't know what you're talking about," Harry said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've confused being a victim with being victimized. Bad things happen to you, yes, but you've had every opportunity to overcome them, to build a better life. Instead, you've chosen to weaponize your pain against your own family." Harry stared at Colbert with undisguised hatred. "You're just another media vulture. picking at the bones of my family's dysfunction. No, Harry, Colbert said sadly. I'm just a guy asking questions that apparently no one else has had the courage to ask you. The silence that followed was deafening. Harry's chest was heaving, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and humiliation. For a moment, it looked like he might actually sit back down and attempt to salvage what was left of his dignity. Instead, he grabbed the edge of the desk and leaned forward menacingly. You know what, Stephen? You sit there in your comfortable little bubble, making jokes about people's real pain, and you think you're some kind of moral authority. You're pathetic. The audience gasped audibly. This was beyond anything they'd expected to see on late-night television. Harry, I think you should take a moment to collect yourself, Colbert said. Collect myself? Harry laughed maniacally. Why? So I can sit here and let you continue to humiliate me on national television? So I can smile and nod while you tear apart everything I've worked for? What have you worked for exactly? Colbert asked, his voice remaining steady despite the chaos. Because from what I can see, you've worked very hard to become a professional victim. You've turned your family trauma into a cottage industry. That was the final straw. Harry's face went from red to purple, his hands trembling with uncontrolled rage. How dare you? How dare you sit there and judge me when you have no idea what I've been through? I'm not judging your experiences, Colbert said firmly. I'm judging your response to them. There's a difference. My response. Harry was practically screaming now. My response has been to try to heal, to try to build a better life for my family, to try to make a difference in the world. By constantly attacking your father and brother in public? Colbert asked. By writing tell-all books and doing revenge documentaries? That's healing. Harry grabbed the edge of the desk, leaning forward menacingly. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've got me all figured out. I think you're a man who's confused anger with righteousness, Colbert replied calmly. And I think you've surrounded yourself with people who are too afraid to tell you the truth. The truth? Harry's voice cracked. The truth is that my family destroyed my mother. And then they tried to destroy me. And then came the moment that would define this entire disaster. Your family destroyed your mother? Colbert leaned forward, his voice becoming more serious. Harry, your mother died in a car accident. That was a tragedy. But it wasn't a conspiracy. You don't know anything about it. Harry screamed, his voice raw with emotion. The way they treated her. The way they drove her out. The way they refused to protect her from the media. The same media you now court constantly? Colbert asked with devastating precision. The same media that's making you millions of dollars? Harry's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. The hypocrisy was so obvious that even he couldn't deny it. For a moment, he looked like he might actually break down completely. His face crumpled, and he looked younger than his years, like that 12-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin. But then the mask slammed back down harder than before. You know what I think happened? Colbert continued, his voice taking on an almost therapeutic tone. I think you were a hurt little boy who lost his mother, and instead of getting proper help, you were told to keep calm and carry on. That was wrong, and I'm sorry that happened to you. But somewhere along the way, you decided that being the hurt little boy was more comfortable than being a healed adult man. Shut up, Harry whispered, tears forming in his eyes. Just shut up. Because being the victim means you never have to take responsibility for anything, Colbert pressed on. It means you can blame everyone else for your problems. It means you can hurt people and justify it by pointing to your own pain. I said shut up, Harry roared, sweeping his arm across the desk and sending the coffee mugs crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking ceramic echoed through the studio like a gunshot. Security! Someone called out, and guards started moving toward the stage, but Colbert waved them off. It's okay, he said calmly. He's just having a tantrum. A tantrum? Harry's voice was hoarse from screaming. You think this is a tantrum? What would you call it? Colbert asked. You're a 40-year-old man throwing things because someone asked you difficult questions. If that's not a tantrum, what is? Harry stared at him for a long moment, his whole body shaking. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I hate you. I hate all of you." "I know you do," Colbert said sadly. "And that's the real tragedy here, Harry. You've let hate consume you. You hate the media, you hate your family, you hate anyone who doesn't validate your victim narrative. But the person you hate most is yourself. And until you deal with that, all the interviews and documentaries and tell-all books in the world won't heal your pain." For a moment, Harry looked like he might actually break down completely. His face crumpled, and he looked vulnerable, lost, like that grieving child he'd once been. Then he ripped off his microphone and threw it on the floor. "This interview is over." "Harry, please," Colbert said, standing up for the first time. "Don't leave like this. We can have a real conversation if you're willing." But Harry was already walking away, his security detail scrambling to keep up. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one last time. "You want to know the truth, Stephen? The truth is that people like you will never understand people like me. You'll never understand what it's like to have your entire life dissected by strangers, to have your family's dirty laundry aired for the world's entertainment." "But Harry," Colbert called after him, "you're the one airing it." Harry froze. For a second, it looked like he might turn around and continue the confrontation. Instead, he simply walked off the stage without another word. What we just witnessed wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. It was a psychological case study in real time, a masterclass in how victimhood can become a prison that locks you away from healing, growth, and genuine human connection. Think about what happened here. Harry walked onto that stage expecting the usual treatment, sympathetic nods, softball questions, maybe a few jokes to keep things light. Instead, he encountered something he clearly hadn't experienced in years: accountability. Someone actually asked him to explain his actions, to justify his choices, to provide concrete examples instead of vague accusations. And he couldn't do it. After years of interviews, documentaries, and tell-all books, Harry couldn't answer the most basic question. What specifically did your family do that was so wrong? This reveals something profound about the psychology of victimhood. When you've built your entire identity around being wronged, when you've monetized your pain and turned your trauma into a brand, you can't afford to heal. Healing would mean moving on, taking responsibility, forgiving, and that would eliminate your entire business model. But here's what makes this truly sad. Harry's pain is real. Losing your mother at 12 years old is genuinely traumatic. Growing up in the public eye is genuinely difficult. The pressures of royal life are genuinely intense. The problem isn't that Harry was hurt. The problem is that he's chosen to weaponize that hurt instead of healing from it. He's confused being a victim with being victimized. And there's a crucial difference. Being victimized is something that happens to you. Being a victim is something you choose to remain. What Colbert exposed so brilliantly is that Harry has had every opportunity to heal. He's had access to the best therapists, unlimited resources, the freedom to build whatever life he wants. Instead, he's chosen to remain trapped in his pain because it's profitable, because it gives him power, because it means he never has to take responsibility for his own choices. This isn't unique to Harry. We live in a culture that increasingly rewards victimhood, that treats trauma as identity, that encourages people to define themselves by their worst experiences rather than their capacity to overcome them. Harry is just the most visible example of where that leads. The most heartbreaking moment in that entire interview was when you could see the little boy behind the man. That split second when his face crumpled and he looked like the grieving child he once was. That's the person who needs healing. But instead of nurturing that wounded child, Harry has turned him into a weapon. Real healing requires taking responsibility for your own life. It requires acknowledging that while others may have hurt you, you're responsible for how you respond to that hurt. It requires choosing growth over grievance, forgiveness over revenge, building bridges instead of burning them. Harry could have been a powerful force for healing, for mental health awareness, for showing people how to overcome trauma and build meaningful lives. Instead, he's become a cautionary tale about what happens when you let your worst experiences define you. The tragedy isn't that Harry was hurt. The tragedy is that he's chosen to stay hurt. And in doing so, he's hurt everyone around him, his family, his children, even himself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop being the victim of your own story. Harry might learn that someday, but based on what we saw, that day isn't today. What did you think about Harry's complete meltdown? Was Colbert too harsh? Or did someone finally need to hold him accountable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity moments like this one.